Welcome to another episode of Books and Bytes.
It's great to be here.
Today we're taking a deep dive into some really interesting material. You've shared excerpts from the book Secrets of Divine Love.
That's right. And our mission really is to unpack its core message.
Yeah, exploring its take on the spiritual journey, the nature of God's love, His mercy.
And how certain principles and practices, according to the book, can potentially transform your relationship with the divine.
Not just the divine, right, but also with yourself and, well, the world around you.
Exactly. And what's interesting is how it draws from various sources.
It uses the Quran, teachings of the Prophet Muhammad.
But also weaves in things like spiritual poetry. Rumi comes up a lot, and stories from different spiritual masters. It tries to give a rich perspective.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. The book seems to offer an invitation, doesn't it? Like an invitation to change how we relate to things.
That's precisely it.
Yeah.
It's positioned less like a purely academic text and more like a practical guide. It uses spiritual language, exercises.
To help you explore the nature of God, which it describes as, well, mysterious, but also full of this unconditional love and mercy.
Yes, concepts often captured in those divine names, Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim, the all-merciful, the especially merciful.
And it presents the Quran not just as scripture, but almost like a roadmap.
A map to help you manifest your deepest spiritual potential. That's the idea.
So the emphasis is really on experience, not just theory. Uncovering spiritual secrets within the practices themselves, maybe. Seeing divine beauty everywhere.
Yes, that contemplation of divine beauty in all of existence is definitely key. And the core idea that it keeps coming back to is that God's love is like a healing balm.
Available to everyone.
Universally available. That's a powerful point. It applies regardless of who you are, where you think you are on your path.
It sounds like an invitation to go deeper, beyond just a surface understanding, something I think a lot of people are curious about, whatever their background.
Absolutely. It taps into that common human longing for connection.
Okay, so if that's the invitation, where does the book say this journey actually begins? How do you start?
It really stresses starting from within, an inner awakening. And that often starts, it suggests, with softening the heart.
Softening the heart. How does it describe that?
The author shares some personal experience talking about practices like fasting, prayer, meditation, not just as rituals, but as ways to soften a heart that felt, hardened.
And this softening, it restores spiritual vision, helps melt away the ego, maybe, to reveal something more authentic underneath, like the fitra.
Exactly, the fitra, that concept of primordial goodness, our inherent nature. And this leads to a really key realization in the book.
Which is?
That the spiritual path isn't something you start only when you feel good enough or perfect. The whole point is to come as you are.
With all your flaws and deficiencies.
Yes, exactly. With everything.
Right.
Trusting that only God's mercy can actually fill those gaps.
That feels, quite liberating, actually. It suggests that feeling of not being ready just kind of dissolves if you shift your focus.
Right. The book uses that analogy of Moses' staff parting the Red Sea, the sea of fear, focusing on God's infinite capacity, not your own limitations.
So that focus shift allows you to move through those internal obstacles that feel insurmountable.
That's a central idea. Instead of being stuck looking at your own limits, you lean on something infinitely greater. It changes the starting point entirely.
From trying to perfect yourself first to relying on the divine right where you are.
Precisely. Starting exactly where you stand.
Okay, so moving from that inner softening outwards, the book talks about connecting with others. Open hearts, looking beyond labels. Rumi comes in here again.
Yes. Rumi's wisdom is brought in to emphasize approaching things, texts, life, people with an open heart, seeking an experience of the divine, not just collecting information.
And it suggests practical things like deep breaths, setting intentions.
Simple techniques like that, yeah. To help consciously open that spiritual heart before engaging, whether it's with prayer or even difficult conversations.
Now, there was a point in the source that really stood out to me, maybe a bit unexpectedly. It mentioned that sometimes building bridges can be harder within religious groups.
Than between people of totally different faiths. Yes, it does mention that.
Why is that, according to the book?
Well, it suggests that sometimes myths or misperceptions can build up even among people who share a broad tradition, but have different practices or interpretations.
That definitely rings true in many areas of life, not just religion.
For sure. But the book's aim isn't to get bogged down in those debates or historical differences. It wants to focus on spiritual uplift.
Finding the common ground, that shared longing for God.
Exactly. That mutual desire for connection with the divine. It quotes the Quran here, that verse about being made into nations and tribes, that you may know one another.
Not just tolerate, but actively know one another. And that the most noble in God's sight are the most righteous inwardly.
Yes, so judging just by the label, the outer form, stops you from truly knowing the person.
It briefly mentions some specific Shia ideas, like divine justice or imma, but as examples of different paths within the same tradition.
Right, not to emphasize division, but to show how different practices can still stem from the Quran and reflect that shared search. The author apparently consulted with Sunni, Shia, and Sufi scholars to try and find that unifying thread.
The core message being connection beyond labels, seeing the shared humanity. That's incredibly relevant today.
Absolutely. How focusing on that shared experience, that longing for meaning, might help bridge divides.
Let's delve a bit more into how the source describes the divine itself, the nature of God.
Okay. It definitely highlights core descriptions. God as the one, Al-Ahad. Self-sufficient as Samad. Nothing comparable, referencing Surah Ikhlas from the Quran.
And possessing beautiful names, right, each reflecting a quality.
Yes, the Azma-ul-Husna. The king, the holy, the source of peace, the merciful. So many qualities reflected in these names.
And God's presence, it's described as being incredibly close.
Very much so. It includes that line from Rumi, to every cry of, "Oh God," he answers 100 times, "I am here." And the Quran itself says, "I am near."
So the idea is God never forgets anyone. His love has no conditions, and he's present right now in this moment.
That's the emphasis. This intimate, ever-present reality.
Which leads to the idea that surrender, submitting your will to God's, can replace fear with faith.
Yes, because God's plan is presented as being greater than our limited perspective or dreams. There's a reference to God being the disposer of affairs.
So true freedom isn't about doing whatever you want, but trusting and aligning with the divine.
That's the perspective offered, yes, trusting the divine plan.
And there's a huge focus on mercy, Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim.
A massive focus, all-encompassing mercy and compassion, embracing everything, everyone, without discrimination. Mercy is just central.
How central?
Well, the names Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim appear at the start of 113 out of 114 chapters in the Quran. Rahman is described almost like the sky covering everything, even our mistakes or sins. It's seen as encompassing even love itself.
That's a powerful image. And the book brings in the mystic view, too, that God is beyond our full comprehension.
Yes, acknowledging the limits of human language and intellect. Rumi saying God's language is silence. Shams Tabrizi saying intellect gets you to the door, but doesn't take you inside.
So reason has its place, but it can't fully grasp or define God.
Exactly. Islam uses reason, but it challenges that human desire to, physically hold or completely pin down the divine.
Where does the book see evidence for God, then?
In creation itself. The intricate design of the universe, of life. It quotes the Quran asking you to look at the heavens. Can you see any flaw? Creation is presented as a clear sign, arguing against pure random chance. Nothing comes from nothing is the argument.
Which naturally leads to that age-old question, well, who created God? How does the source address that?
By explaining that God, by definition, transcends creation's limits, time, space, cause, and effect. Being eternal means having no beginning.
So no beginning means no creator, the uncreated creator. And these divine qualities, like mercy, power, love, they aren't just abstract ideas.
No, the book emphasizes they are manifested in creation. You see God's power in the ocean, his mercy in the rain, his love in the bond between a parent and child, his beauty in a flower.
So every part of creation reflects these names, these qualities.
Like seeing an artist's skill or style in their painting, but knowing the artist isn't limited by that painting. Every atom, it says, reflects his names.
And there's an exercise suggested to connect with this idea.
Yeah, a reflection exercise.
Yeah.
Go into nature, pick up an object, a leaf, a stone, list its qualities, find divine names that resonate with those qualities, repeat the names, and contemplate how everything is sustained by these divine attributes.
Connecting the microcosm to the macrocosm.
Exactly. It helps you see the divine reflected everywhere.
So the takeaway is God's nature is both immense, cosmic, but also intimately present in every detail. Contemplating that can really shift how you see the world.
And your place within it, definitely.
Okay, building on God's nature, the book then asks, who are you? How does it answer that?
It presents a very powerful view. You are not an accident, not a product of random chance.
But an intentional creation.
An intentional creation of a perfect God, created by God for God. It references the Quran saying God breathed his spirit into humanity.
Positioning humans as a kind of bridge between heaven and earth.
Yes, exactly. And our main work then is to wake up from the illusion of separation.
The illusion that we're separate from God or from what we're seeking.
Right. Faith isn't something external to acquire. It's already there within you. That fitra, that primordial goodness, your soul, it suggests, already knows its connection.
Like the wave realizing it's actually the ocean.
That's the analogy used, yes. A beautiful one.
And humans are described as microcosms, chosen representatives. Why us specifically?
Partly because of our dual nature. We have a capacity for good, but also lower desires and free will. This duality allows us to manifest and experience certain divine qualities, like forgiveness or patience, in a unique way. More so, perhaps, than beings without that struggle.
And belief in God's oneness, tawhid, is seen as innate, like built-in hardware.
Part of the fitra, yes. Something that can't be fundamentally altered by your environment, according to the Quran. So faith becomes a process of returning to your true original self.
It uses a Rumi metaphor here too, right? The king's task.
Yes, the king who gives his servant one main task, but the servant gets distracted by 100 other things and forgets the primary purpose. A reminder to stay focused on the core reason for our existence.
And our worthiness. Where does that come from?
Directly from God alone, the source says. It's inherent, not earned by our actions.
But actions still matter.
Absolutely. Actions are the way we actualize the potential God gave us. As the Quran says, roughly, man will only have what he strives for.
What about sins, mistakes? How are they viewed?
Not as things that make God stop loving you, but as veils. Veils we put up that block the light, creating a kind of self-imposed darkness, like turning your face away from the sun.
So we oppress ourselves, not God oppressing us.
That's the perspective from the Quranic verses cited. And the main veil is identified as the ego, the nafs.
The ego, how's that described?
As forming when our spirit connects with the physical body. It's the veil between our everyday consciousness and our deeper spirit. Purifying the ego is how you allow Allah's light to shine through.
It uses that acronym, right? Ego, edging God out.
Yes, a memorable way to put it.
Yeah, and even difficulties, trials, they're
Yeah.
reframed too.
As opportunities. Opportunities to turn back to God. God is presented as equally present in times of ease and times of hardship, always calling us back.
So the really powerful takeaway here is seeing yourself as intentionally created, inherently worthy, with that divine spark already inside, and challenges our chances to return to that truth.
Exactly. And it prompts you to consider, what is that core purpose, that king's task for you?
Okay, so from this understanding of self, how does the book look at practices? It tackles jihad, which is often, let's say, misunderstood.
Yes, it confronts that head on. It starts with the root, meaning to strive or struggle. And it makes a clear distinction between the lesser jihad and the greater jihad.
The lesser jihad being?
The outward, sometimes combative struggle. Defending freedom, rights, fighting oppression. It cites the Quran on this, but it stresses that even this has strict divine laws.
Rules of engagement, basically. Protecting non-combatants, the environment.
Yes, very strict rules. No harming civilians, destroying crops or trees, poisoning wells. It's framed as a process towards peace and justice, not wanton destruction.
But the emphasis is really on the greater jihad.
Absolutely. That's presented as the far more important and constant struggle.
Which is the internal struggle.
The internal spiritual striving against one's own ego, against lower desires, negative inclinations. That is called the great jihad.
And the intellect plays a role here, the word aqwal.
Yes, linked to the idea of restraining or tethering. The intellect's value is seen in its ability to help control those lower impulses, which in turn allows you to better perceive God's signs.
But it's not just about the head intellect, right? It mentions the heart, too.
The heart having its own spiritual intellect. It refers to the Prophet's advice, consult your heart. And it even briefly mentions modern research, like from HeartMath Institute.
On the heart's own neural network, its influence on emotions, connecting ancient wisdom with contemporary findings.
Exactly, providing a different lens to think about the heart's capacity for knowing.
So the core insight here is a major reframing of jihad. The primary battle isn't out there, it's inside, purifying the ego, aligning the will.
And it invites you to see where that greater jihad plays out in your own life, day to day.
Another key practice, engaging with the Quran. How is that presented?
As divine communication. It highlights that the very first word revealed was ikra, read or recite.
And the Quran itself is described not just as words, but as something more.
Yes, as a divine frequency almost. A sacred sound code, a form of light, A living text meant to bring you out of spiritual darkness and nourish that innate goodness, the fitra.
There's a metaphor used, isn't there, about rain?
The rain metaphor, yes. The Quran is like rain falling on dry, dead earth, the heart bringing it back to life.
And it suggests our spirits and the Quran share the same source.
From Allah, yes. So even if you don't understand the Arabic perfectly, the act of recitation itself is seen as spiritually resonant. The heart connects, even if the mind doesn't grasp everything.
But the mind's noise can block that connection, and the ego acts like a shell.
Exactly. That shell needs to crack for the message to truly penetrate the heart.
There's that story about the coal bag and water.
Ah, yes. The master tells the young man to fetch water in a dirty coal sack. Of course, the water runs out.
But he keeps trying.
He keeps trying. And eventually, even though the bag never holds the water, the act of constantly running water through it washes the bag clean.
A beautiful illustration. So engaging with the Quran purifies you, even if you don't feel like you're retaining it all.
Precisely. It helps remove those veils, helps you see you're already connected to what you seek.
And the Quran is presented as unique, different from human books.
As God's pure, unfiltered speech, truth, every verse, every ayah, is a signpost pointing back to God.
And we're meant to ponder these signs, not just read passively.
Yes, ponder on its signs is the call. Deep reflection is encouraged.
It uses a story about an angry man, too, to show the power of words.
Right. How simple, harsh words can cause a strong physical and emotional reaction. If human words have that power, imagine the power of God's perfect words to heal and transform.
It even touches on scientific ideas about vibration and energy.
Briefly, yeah. Just contextually, mentioning Einstein or studies suggesting sound frequencies might affect DNA to underline the idea that speech carries power on a fundamental level.
But ultimately, the goal isn't just reading or memorizing.
No. The ultimate goal is to become a living manifestation of the Quran's message, to embody its teachings, mercy, kindness, forgiveness, service, internalization over memorization.
So viewing the Quran as this transformative vibrational frequency really changes how you might approach it.
Definitely. It shifts it from just reading a book to engaging with a living source of guidance and transformation.
The book then outlines these spiritual dimensions: Islam, Iman, Ihsan. Can you walk us through those?
Sure. Islam, the path itself, is presented as a way of life for transformation, reigniting that relationship with God, guiding relationships with creation.
And the word Islam itself means more than just submission.
Yes. Its root also connects to peace, well-being, freedom. Surrendering in peace is seen as liberating you from the ego. The practices help ground this.
Okay, so the 3 stations are like levels of depth.
Exactly. Depths of experiencing divine love. Islam is the first, the outward actions, surrendering the body, the 5 pillars, testimony of faith, prayer, charity, fasting, Hajj.
And the analogy for this is the butterfly seeing smoke, knowledge of certainty.
Right. You know there's a fire because you see the smoke. Iman is the next station.
Belief held within, in the heart.
Intellectual and emotional conviction, yes. That's like the butterfly seeing the light of the flame, feeling its heat, the eye of certainty.
And the highest is Ihsan.
Ihsan, the spiritual dimension. Worshipping God as though you see Him, or knowing He sees you, being fully present with God. Here, the will is surrendered. Attachment to the separate self dissolves.
Like the butterfly dissolving into the flame, truth of certainty.
That's the ultimate state described. So it's a progression, not just following rules, but becoming Islam, embodying that peace through surrender of body, mind, and soul.
A journey from outward action to inner presence. That framework is really helpful.
It maps the deepening experience.
Let's talk about salat, the ritual prayer. How is that framed?
As much more than just ritual. It means supplication, connection, binding. It's an act of consciously unplugging from the world's distractions.
To connect with truth. Al-Haq.
Yes. And it's a body prayer integrating mind, body, spirit, soul. The movements themselves have meaning.
It's described as a charging station, 5 times a day.
A spiritual charging station, yes. Connecting back to the source to recharge the spiritual heart.
And the focus isn't just on doing it perfectly, but on letting go.
Letting go of what gets in the way of that natural alignment with the divine. Distractions aren't failures. They show you what you're still attached to, what needs surrender.
It notes that salat was given directly from God to the prophet.
Yes. During the ascension journey, the Miraj, highlighting its unique status as our direct line of communication to God, mirroring how revelation is God's communication to us.
And the physical postures, bowing, prostration, They have significance.
Deep significance. Sins falling away, expressing humility, receptivity. Prostration is like emptying your hands so God can hold them. A state of complete surrender.
There's a story comparing a distracted king to a woman lost in thought.
Right. The king praying but thinking of his kingdom versus the woman so absorbed in thoughts of her absent husband she doesn't even notice the king. It highlights that what matters is the heart's presence and focus.
So the 5 daily prayers are meant to cultivate a constant inner state of prayer.
That's the goal. Remembering God continuously, not just in those formal moments. Rumi's quote comes in again. Don't leave the world. The treasure is hidden in everyday life. Integrate the awareness.
What about the adhan, the call to prayer?
Seen as a spiritual alarm clock. A wake-up call for the heart, reminding the community to turn from the temporary to the eternal. A moment of accountability and realignment.
And wudu, the ablution before prayer.
Cleansing both outer dirt and inner veils, inner sins, preparing yourself to stand before God. Intention transforms the physical act into a spiritual purification.
And prayer isn't just for oneself.
No, it encompasses all creation. Sincere lovers of God also contemplate his creation, remembering God with gratitude, always.
There's a practice mentioned for dealing with distractions.
Yes, instead of just fighting the thoughts, ask Allah for help. Consciously surrender the distraction rather than struggling against it.
So Salat is presented as this dynamic connection point, a way to recharge and cultivate presence throughout the day.
A vital practice for grounding and connection, yes.
Moving on to charity, zakat, tzedakah. How does the book approach this?
As manifesting divine generosity. It starts with that powerful story of menstrual Hajj eating with lepers.
Why that story?
To illustrate seeing the sacred, the holiness in all beings, even those rejected by society, and aligning yourself with God's own boundless compassion.
And true charity is defined in a specific way.
As doing good but seeing only Allah as the doer, not taking personal credit or ownership. It's a cleansing of the ego's need to possess even acts of generosity.
Don't seek praise, don't boast about it. Generosity is reflecting God's quality.
Exactly. It's God, the generous, acting through you, and the full blossoms in service.
No good deed is too small. Give even if you won't be repaid.
Yes, those points are stressed, and forgiveness is tied into this very strongly.
Forgiving others. How is that linked to charity?
It's presented as a form of charity to yourself, freeing you from anger's burden. And crucially, it's the fastest path to receiving God's forgiveness.
Opportunities to forgive are like divine gifts, allowing you to embody God's forgiving nature.
Yes. When we forgive, Allah forgives us. It's reciprocal.
The book also notes the broader benefits of giving. Social, psychological.
Touches on survival of the kindest, the idea of interconnectedness, like redwood trees supporting each other in a forest. Community.
How are zakat and sadaqah framed conceptually?
As emptying the heart, like emptying a ship of excess cargo, greed, attachment. It's about purification, seeking God's pleasure, not buying favors, giving for the face of Allah.
The date palm story comes up here too.
Yes, the old man planting a date palm he won't live to eat from, giving for future generations, recognizing we benefit from past generosity and should contribute to the future.
So zakat is mercy manifested through people, bringing love and help.
That's the essence. It quotes the Prophet on excellent actions, gladdening hearts, feeding the hungry. Rumi's line again, be a lamp or a lifeboat or a ladder.
Help someone heal. Be like a shepherd.
Beautiful imagery for selfless service.
So the key insight is seeing charity not just as duty, but as embodying divine generosity, purifying the self in the process.
Yes, transforming both giver and receiver.
Let's talk about fasting, Sam, especially in Ramadan. How is that explored?
As feeding the spirit, not just abstaining from food and drink. It's fundamentally about prioritizing God above physical needs and desires.
A gift for transformation.
A divine gift, yes. For strengthening faith, changing habits, aiming for a higher state of consciousness. Fasting for Allah elevates the physical difficulty into an act of worship.
And it involves mirroring God's qualities.
By consciously choosing to transcend lower human impulses, you reflect divine attributes like self-sufficiency, patience. There's that high station mentioned. Fasting is for me and I shall reward it.
And the joy felt when breaking the fast and anticipating meeting God.
Those are highlighted as rewards. The spiritual path, it says, is about removing what blocks you from seeing you're already in God's presence. Fasting helps remove those blocks.
How? By weakening the ego.
Exactly. It weakens the ego's demands and amplifies the spirit's guidance. The Cherokee parable of the two wolves is used here.
The one you feed wins.
Right. Fasting is consciously choosing to feed the wolf representing the spirit, the divine qualities, rather than the wolf of base desires.
It also mentions fasting from thoughts.
Not stopping thoughts, but choosing not to consume or identify with every negative or unhelpful thought the ego produces. Observing them, letting them pass, returning focus to the divine. Realizing you are not your thoughts.
Laylatul Qadr, the night of power, gets special mention.
As immensely significant. Better than 1,000 months, angels descending, profound peace, a night where good deeds are magnified, where destiny can be shaped.
And the Mansur story, again eating with lepers while fasting.
Emphasizing the spirit of fasting, compassion, connection, putting God first over mere self-denial.
So the insight is that fasting is a powerful discipline for weakening the ego, strengthening the spirit, and consciously choosing what you nurture within yourself.
A tool for profound inner realignment.
Okay, the Hajj pilgrimage. How is that presented beyond the physical journey?
As a metaphor for the pilgrimage of life itself. Life is a journey from Allah, back to Allah. Every moment, you're orbiting something.
Your personal Kaaba.
Exactly. What's the center of your life? What commands your attention and devotion? That's your Kaaba right now.
The story of Alexander the Great is used here.
To highlight impermanence. His power and wealth meant nothing at death. Only good deeds done for God last. Everything else gets left behind.
This touches on loss, grief. How does the book approach that?
As perhaps the hardest trial, the key, it suggests, is witnessing God's presence within the pain. Grief can become a catalyst for profound gratitude for the love experienced.
Depth of grief reflects depth of love.
Yes, and impermanence itself is framed as a mercy. This too shall pass. It offers hope in sorrow, humility in joy. If things were permanent, suffering could be endless. Anchoring happiness in the eternal God brings stability.
Death isn't seen as an end,
but an unveiling. Life is a dream, death is waking up. The false self dies, truth remains. For those surrendered to God, death is a return to love, al-wadud. Running from it only brings you closer.
Pain isn't meant to be ignored.
No, but brought into God's presence. Be honest with the pain, like Prophet Jacob expressing his grief to God. It's a crucible for the soul.
Death as liberation.
Escape from the ego's cage, the spirit flies free, the beginning of forever. So live a life of service and humility.
And the Hajj rituals themselves are symbolic of this life journey.
Deeply symbolic. The gathering of diverse people shows equality before God, meant to foster knowing one another, unveiling oneness, not division. The shared goal is intimacy with God.
That story of the lover at God's door is powerful.
Who is there? It is I, rejected. Then, who is there? It is you, welcomed. It perfectly illustrates sacrificing the I, the ego, to achieve union.
The station of Abraham, detaching from all that isn't God, sacrificing the ego.
Symbolized by the ram, obeying God above all attachments. Rebuilding the Kaaba symbolizes rebuilding our inner spiritual center.
The intention, Naya, is key, leaving the world behind.
Seeking only Allah. The Talbiyah prayer embodies this. Here I am at your service, you have no partners. Total dedication.
And the sacrifice. Offering an animal.
Symbolizes surrendering what's valuable for God's sake, detaching from lower animalistic desires. Giving the meat to the poor connects sacrifice with mercy and increases blessings.
Barakah. So the Hajj provides this intense symbolic map for our entire life's pilgrimage towards God.
A powerful framework for understanding the journey, its challenges, and its ultimate goal.
Finally, the book addresses heaven and hell. How are they described?
Less as places, more as states of being, states of consciousness.
Help you.
Primarily the pain of separation. Separation from God, from love, from your true self. The furthest state of consciousness from the source. Perpetual regret, spiritual agony. The descriptions of fire and punishment symbolize this inner torment.
And heaven.
The opposite, where the veils of separation are removed. Direct witnessing of God's presence. Imam Ali's quote, "Step on your ego, step into heaven."
So hell's fires burn away resistance to God, and heaven is full alignment.
That's one interpretation offered. Heaven is awareness of your true spiritual nature, the joy of the spirit returning home.
And the devil, Satan.
His goal is separation, isolation, feeding the ego pride, envy to distance you from God and others.
Actions have consequences. We create our own state.
Yes, the Quran is clear. You reap what you sow. We light our own fires of separation through our choices. Free will makes hell a possibility.
God doesn't wrong people, they wrong themselves.
That's the Quranic perspective cited. Asking for no hell is like asking for no choice or no justice.
Is there a reflection exercise linked to this?
Yes, reflecting heaven on earth. Since heaven is experiencing God's qualities, love, mercy, peace, without the ego's interference, we can strive to embody those qualities now, polishing the heart's mirror.
A practice involving morning prayer and reminders.
Setting the intention in the morning to embody kindness, compassion, seek God's light, and then using reminders during the day to consciously realign with that intention.
So, thinking of heaven and hell as states of connection or separation rather than just future places really changes the focus to our present choices.
It makes our daily actions and inner state profoundly significant right now.
Bringing it all together then, what's the ultimate secret, the core takeaway from Secrets of Divine Love?
It boils down to this. You are profoundly loved. Remember that beginning point. God blew his spirit into you.
Planted divine love within you, created you for him.
Exactly. Chosen. An intentional creation, a representative of grace.
And our purpose is to know ourselves, know God, love God.
And worship with our whole heart. Seeking him, praising him, swimming in his mercy, discovering the spiritual gems already inside us. Worship unveils that true self.
Like the flower turning to the sun.
Beautifully put. Turning to Allah unveils your true essence.
And God's love itself is constant, unaffected by our actions.
That's crucial. Sin doesn't diminish his love. It just veils us from experiencing it. The love is always there. Our awareness fluctuates based on our heart's state.
So the practices, the pillars, the principles, they aren't earning love.
They're polishing cloths. Tools to remove the dust, the veils, revealing the priceless truth of who you are, the divine essence God placed within you. Realizing you were chosen by God removes that need for external validation.
The divine names are already planted in the heart. Our job is to let them grow.
Get the ego out of the way. Surrender. Let the light and mercy water that seed. Heaven isn't just later. It's cultivated inside us now.
By living in the Spirit, connected to that essence, becoming a reflection of heaven on earth.
That's the ultimate invitation.
Wow. We've covered a lot, journeying through these excerpts from Secrets of Divine Love. From inner awakening, understanding God's nature, the meaning behind practices like prayer, charity, fasting, Hajj.
Right up to that core message. Being an intentional creation of love.
And it all seems to circle back to God's love being constant and our path being about removing those veils, ego, forgetfulness, attachment that hide it from us.
It's a powerful and consistent theme throughout.
For everyone listening, if you found this discussion compelling, we definitely recommend grabbing a copy of Secrets of Divine Love to explore these ideas more deeply. You can find a link in the description.
And of course, please subscribe to Books and Bytes for more deep dives into fascinating texts.
Okay, so here's a final provocative thought for you to consider, building on what we've discussed. The source material consistently suggests the path isn't about becoming something you're not, but unveiling the truth that you are already fundamentally what you seek, a manifestation of divine love. So if those secrets of divine love are truly already planted like seeds in the soil of your heart, what is one small veil, one small barrier maybe? It's a fear, a judgment about yourself, an attachment that you could begin to consciously, gently start removing today, just to let a little more of that inner light bloom.